Hi, welcome back to our study on the Apostle Paul. I'm Guy Williams. I'm the pastor at First United Methodist Church in Dayton, Texas, in case you're a guest with us. Glad you're here. Our mission as a church is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus. So no matter where you are on your faith journey, whether you're exploring faith in Jesus or whether you've put your faith in Christ and are seeking to grow in Him, I hope this study will help you to take further steps along that journey. All right, so we are at a place in the story where Paul is back in Jerusalem. He has been on 3 missionary journeys. He's traveled around the Mediterranean world, starting churches, recruiting co-workers, training them up, carrying people with him, investing in local leaders, all those sorts of things. He's been writing letters to churches that he has either established or is hoping to visit. And now he finds himself back in Jerusalem. Now, from his letters, we know that he was working on a collection, a monetary offering from the churches around the Mediterranean to bring back to the Jerusalem church to help out. That's from the letters. Luke doesn't really talk about that. So, but in Luke's account, he's who we're following for the timeline here, because he tells this, he has a history for this. So here's what we find in chapter 21, verse 17. Paul says, or rather Luke says, when we arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. Again, the we is Luke, because this is one of the several passages where Luke is narrating a situation where he is a part of the group that is involved. So in verse 18, the next day Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. So they're reporting back to the Jerusalem church, James and the others who had been present at the Jerusalem council in Acts chapter 15. So Paul greets them. He shares about what's happened in the ministry among the Gentiles around the Mediterranean. So this is kind of good. This is also, there's challenges here because Paul is seen as someone who is kind of subverting the Jewishness of their faith and just bringing these Gentiles in through faith in Jesus, and that it's not keeping respect for the Jewish kind of traditions and customs and way of life. Of course, at the Jerusalem Council, they did agree that Gentiles could come into the faith simply through faith in the Messiah, in Jesus, and were reconciled to God through Him, that they did not have to be circumcised and take on the covenant of Torah as a part of their identity in their life. In order to do that, they could simply come into the people of God through Jesus the Messiah. Now, after a little time there, there are some Jews from Asia who come and see Paul at the temple. They've seen someone from Ephesus with Paul in the city, and so they make an assumption that Paul has taken this person to the temple, which would be a violation of how their temple structure worked for who had access to what places. But Luke says that they assumed this was true, not that it was true. So the whole city is roused up, however, and people come. They drag Paul out of the temple. The gates are shut. They are trying to kill him. They're beating him. And so because there's an uprising, that gets the attention of the Roman troops and a Roman commander. They take control of the situation. They take Paul into custody, which is actually good news because they save him from being beaten by people who are rioting, and they have him bound with chains. So at this moment, I might be just really thankful that the military got here in time. Paul, it doesn't say that he's not appreciative of that fact. However, he is single-minded in his interest in speaking to the crowd and sharing about Jesus. So he asks if he can say something to the crowd that's there. And in the end of chapter 21 and beginning of chapter 22, that's what we find, is Paul sharing his witness and testimony. This is where we find some of Paul's biographical background information, because he gives it in his kind of introduction of himself. But he tells the story of his conversion on the Damascus Road. Not a conversion away from Judaism, just to be clear, but his conversion to belief in Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. And it's a calling story for him too. It's the moment of his call because Jesus brings him to faith and calls him into evangelistic ministry all in the same kind of event. So this is what he gets into. This is the second of three accounts of what happened on the Damascus Road. The first, of course, was Luke just narrating the story. The second is this one where Luke is telling us about Paul sharing the story with this crowd. And the third will be in a few chapters where Paul is sharing the story with another official who's a governing authority. So Paul tells the story, and the crowd listens. It says until he said that the Lord had said to him, "Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles." Doesn't seem like they had a problem until he says this, and then they raise their voices. In verse 22, chapter 22, it says, "Then they raised their voices and shouted, 'Rid the earth of him; he's not fit to live.'" Now, I've preached some sermons that didn't go well before, but no one ever said, "Rid the earth of him, he's not fit to live." Thank goodness it hasn't gone that far. However, this stirs up the crowd even more. And Rome is like the saying, roughly like the saying that I heard once from a friend, that parents are not interested in justice, parents are interested in quiet. And so Rome isn't as interested in who's right or wrong as they are in not having uprisings and disturbing the peace. So their job is just keep the peace. Well, they take Paul into custody, and they are ordering that he be flogged and interrogated for whatever it is that he's doing wrong to cause this uprising. But Paul mentions that he is a Roman citizen. Now, that means that he has certain rights and that they had better be very protective of those rights. Otherwise, they would be in big trouble. So this is really wise and quick on Paul's part. The commander of this Roman guard is interested in finding out exactly what on earth everybody's so upset with Paul about. So he says that he's to be released the next day in order to appear before the Sanhedrin, which is the group of Jewish leaders. Paul goes to them. To cut to the point, he gets started with them, but he gets into trouble pretty quickly. And he does realize something that will help him out, it seems, which is he observes that, I'll just read this part in chapter 23, beginning in verse 6. It says, "Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, 'My brothers, I am a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead.'" Excuse me. Verse 7, "When he had said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided." Now, why are they divided? The Sadducees, it says in verse 8, say that there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe all these things, which is to say that the Pharisees believed that at the end of time, when God was ready, that there would be a final resurrection of the dead, that everyone would be bodily raised, and there would be a judgment. And it says that the Sadducees did not believe this, nor did they believe in angels or spirits. So you've got these two kind of theological camps there in the Sanhedrin, and Paul recognizes an opportunity to get the focus off of himself and to say something that is true. He stands on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead. That's true, but it's not necessarily what either of them understand fully the way that he does. But he knows this is something they disagree about. So there's a great uproar, and they're arguing with each other. The dispute becomes really violent, and the commander of the Roman army is now upset because he's got this Roman citizen in this situation. So he has the troops go down and take Paul back into custody and bring him into the barracks. Now, in verse 11, chapter 23, it says, "The following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, 'Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome.'" Now, that's important because now Paul has some kind of encouragement and reassurance about something that he has long felt a leading and a desire to do, which is to visit Rome, to see the churches that are already established there, to visit them, to continue his ministry in Rome, and possibly to use being in Rome as a launching point to go further to Spain and to continue his ministry in that way. Here he has a reassurance that Rome is not just a pipe dream, but it's something that God has in mind for him and that God will make a way to see it happen. Finally, he is in the barracks there in Jerusalem. He is under Roman guard, but there are a group of Jews, it says at least 40 men, more than 40 men, who are involved in a conspiracy, a plot to kill Paul. They've taken a vow that they're not going to eat or drink until it happens. So that is their aim, and they are going to ask for him to come back to the Sanhedrin the next day, but that's just a pretense to get him out in the open and to attack him and kill him. Paul's sister has a son, so Paul's nephew is coming to visit Paul in prison. This is something that friends could do, and in fact, friends and relatives were the people who would come and bring food or bring other supplies to people who were in prison. So his nephew is visiting him, and he tells Paul about this plot. Paul calls a centurion and has him take Paul's nephew to the commander of the guard and to let him know so that they can deal with it, because now that they know they have a Roman citizen in custody, they have a responsibility to keep him alive and to keep him safe from harm and to be really discerning about what they do. So they are aware of it now. The commander hears him, is glad to know what's going to happen, that there's an ambush plan, and he dismisses the young man, that is the nephew, with this warning in verse 22, "Don't tell anyone that you have repeated this to me." Now, next time we're going to look at Paul's transfer to Caesarea. Caesarea is a town that's on the sea. It is on the Mediterranean coast. It's a really beautiful place. And it's also where the local governor is, and that's who's going to see Paul next. So before we go, however, I want to highlight just a few things for us for kind of food for thought. One is our readiness to share our story. Now, Paul found himself in just a really amazing and kind of odd, frankly, situation to want to give his testimony about what Jesus had done in his life, what he had meant in his life. But that's where he found himself there when that uprising occurred and where the commanders took over, the Roman commander took over. He asked, "Can I say a word to the crowd?" And so he allowed him to do so. And that's when he shared his story about how Jesus came to him and revealed himself to Paul on the Damascus Road. Well, here's the point, is that you and I don't need to have a dramatic story like Paul. We don't have to share it in a public speech to a large crowd. But it's important to be able to tell our story simply, if for no other reason, than to be really in touch with our story. If someone wants to know why we are a Christian or how we came to believe in Jesus, it's good to have a sense of where to start and how to very simply be able to tell that. So here's a couple of questions to think about. Is one, when did I come to believe in Jesus and then the gospel? Number two, who and what were the factors or the people that influenced me to believe, in coming to believe? And then finally, what difference has Jesus made in my life? What's the difference that knowing Jesus and having that foundation makes in my life today? So that's just a short way to have a readiness to share our story if someone asks, or if we sense an opportunity where it's appropriate and important to share that story. Second is when Paul is in the Sanhedrin and he recognizes that the Sadducees and the Pharisees, that is, these different theological camps, are present, and he says something that is clearly siding with one, and it ends up pitting them against each other so that they become arguing with one another, and their attention is basically off of him. That reminded me of a saying of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus told his followers that they should be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, or maybe one translation has it shrewd as serpents but innocent as doves. I bring that up to say it just seems like a really shrewd, wise, heads-up move on Paul's behalf to recognize this opportunity and to bring it up and to work it out this way. A colleague of mine in the Methodist clergy has often said that Jesus told us that we were to be wise as serpents but innocent as doves, and yet too often the children of God have been innocent as serpents and wise as doves. Think about that. I hate to think about the times when I've been, rather than shrewd as a serpent or wise as a serpent, innocent as a dove, that I've been innocent as a serpent and wise as a dove. But I'm sure there's a lot of truth to that. And then finally, throughout this period where Paul is in Jerusalem, we find accounts of Paul being under threat of violence or suffering violence because of his identification with Jesus and his commitment and call to his calling to spread the word of the gospel. I live in North America. I have not faced physical violence for my faith in Jesus. There are Christians around the world, however, for whom that's a normal reality, that threat is very much alive, and there are people who have suffered violence for their faith, for their identification with Jesus, and for being faithful to him and their allegiance to him. The thing that I have in mind as food for thought is simply, what do we owe our brothers and sisters in Christ who are persecuted physically, violently around the world? I don't think that feeling guilty about not being in this situation is really something that gets us anywhere. However, it does make me think about a couple of things. One is that I need to remember to be prayerful about the global church and places where people are persecuted for their faith. And then two is I need to recognize the opportunity to live faithfully, to live well, and to take advantage of the opportunities that I'm afforded. They could just as easily not be present. And so I want to be a good steward of the opportunity that I have to live faithfully to Jesus and to share the gospel without the threat of violence that way. So that just has me thinking about what calling that puts on me to be faithful. All right, that's it for this session. I look forward to the next time when we follow Paul to Caesarea and see that Jesus is going to make good on that promise that he has in mind for Paul to end up in Rome and to share the word there too. And we'll see it go that direction. But for now, I appreciate being able to do this study with you, and I hope it's a benefit to you and that you've enjoyed it as well. Thanks. I'll see you next time.